What's going on, my friends? Anthony here, 6Scale Mafia. We are back with episode 4 in our photography series. Today we're going to be talking about some lenses. We talked a little bit about it before, but primarily we're going to be talking about depth of field and the focal length on lenses and what that means and how you can apply that to your toy photography. As always, my buddy Harry is with us. What's going on, my friend?
Hey, how's it going? Yeah, we touched a little bit about, what kind of lenses you want to get, whether it's prime lenses, whether it's zoom lenses. So now we're going to actually talk about how to apply that. So we have a little graph here for you guys. And as you can see here, what is focal length, right? And how does it work? Focal length is represented in millimeters, like we mentioned, right? Do you want a 50 millimeter? Do you want a 250 millimeter? That's what focal length is. So the smaller the focal length, the wider the angle. For example, a 15 millimeter lens has a view angle of 180 degree, which is super wide, right? But if you go up to something like 400 millimeter, as you can see here, your view angle is becoming smaller and smaller, only 6 degree. And like I mentioned before, moving in and out with physically with your camera is completely different than zooming in with your focal length. Let's say if you have a 70 millimeter lens, no matter where you are, or no matter what the distance between you and the subject is, your viewing angle is always going to be 34 degrees. That's never going to change.
No, and kind of think of it this way: if you guys play video games like Call of Duty, any kind of first-person shooters, or any other kind of RPGs that allow you to have field of view, the FOV is very similar. It's very similar in a sense. So if you had your field of view all the way up, you're going to see so much more of your screen, right? If it's all the way down, it's going to be super zoomed in. So it's almost, if that makes sense to any gamers out there.
That's honestly the perfect analogy. I couldn't come up with a better one myself.
Well, that's kind of what I was thinking, right? Because I like a high field of view when I'm playing because I want to see more. But that's basically what it is here in the photography world as well. I mean, if you're rocking a 15 millimeter lens, or like a 25, 35, you're going to see a lot besides the subject. So maybe if you're taking a shot on a television, you may want a huge television, right? Because you're going to see, not only are you going to see the whole television, you'll probably see beyond that. You'll see your shelves behind that, whatever you have. So what do you do in a case like that?
Yeah, it's completely different, right? I have an example right here. So if you take a look at these two Vader shots here, one was shot on the 25 millimeter lens and the other one was shot on the 70 millimeter lens. And as you can see here in the 25 millimeter shot, basically you can see the whole edge of the monitor. But with the 70 millimeter shot here, you can see much less of that monitor. So that's something that you should keep in mind. So it really depends on what you're going for though, but in this case, for example, if you have a small monitor, then you might want a tighter lens.
Yeah, definitely keep that in mind. That's a great point, Harry, because if you're not doing it on television, maybe you're on your computer monitor, laptop monitor, a small screen. If you're doing monitor shots, then yeah, you're absolutely going to want higher, like a 90 millimeter, for example. Because like I said, the lower the millimeters, the wider the shot, right? And the higher the millimeter, the tighter that shot is. So if I'm using my hands as an example, if you had, again, a 25, let's say this is the shot from here to here, but with a 90, the shot's here to here, right? So that's what I mean. So again, the lower the number is the wider the shot. The higher the number is the tighter the shot.
Yeah, like Anthony just mentioned here, if you look at the classification and best usage section here in this graph, it literally shows you just that. From 10 millimeter to 35, that's considered wide angle. From around, 35 to 70, that's considered normal. And then when you get to 70 to 135, that's medium telephoto. And then obviously the highest, 135 to around 300, that's your telephoto lens.
Well, yeah, and honestly, if you're going to go 300 plus, that's if you're trying to take a shot of an airplane or a bird far away or something very far away, but it's going to be a super tight angle, right? So I think for toy photography, I mean, you really don't want to go over 100 in my opinion.
No, yeah. And then again, to keep in mind, we're doing photography in 1/6 scale, right? It's completely different than 1:1 scale. I know a lot of people, they want to mimic certain shots from movies and they're like, oh, I want to use that same exact lens, but that's not going to work. right? Because in movies, that's 1:1 scale. So you're going to have to do a little bit of math to kind of, convert that so that it works with 1/6 scale.
As Harry mentioned, since we are shooting in 1/6 scale, and we're not going to cover too many lenses here, but one of the things that we use, I know Harry has one, I have one, a lot of you out there I know personally also have one, are macro lenses. And macro lenses are typically used for, honestly, like macro photography. You're taking really, really close-ups of maybe, jewelry or insects, things of that nature, or you want to see all the details on a leaf or a flower, right? You're like really, really close up. But it also applies for us in 6 scale because, again, we're not shooting in 1:1 scale. I'm not taking a photo of Harry in life-size scale. I'm taking a shot of Harry who's 12 inches tall, right? So now your focal, everything can kind of get a little askew. I mean, and we don't all use just exclusively macro, but macro is another really good advantage. I think personally, when I want to get those, I'm already coming in on a tight shot, but I want to show you like maybe all the paint apps on a figure. I want to highlight all these details, or maybe how the paint looks on the eyes, or how some of the sculpt is, structured, things like that nature. Macro lens is where you're really going to be able to show off a ton of detail.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely would recommend a macro lens at some point. I started out using just a regular lens, and there are times when I would, zoom in onto my figure, and I'm just sitting there like, wait, why isn't this focusing? I cannot focus on the eye. I can't focus on the nose. Everything looks a little blurry. But when I switch over to a macro lens and I zoom into the same spot, everything is clearly in focus and everything looks super crisp and clear. And that is the benefit of having a macro lens over just a regular normal lens.
Yeah, and I'll show you guys, as you guys can see here, right now I'm using a standard lens, a non-macro lens, and I'm trying to do exactly what Harry was saying. Like, here is our figure, and I'm really close to this figure right now with my camera. Like, we're really close to this figure, and we cannot focus. The lens cannot pick that up because it's trying to find stuff in basically life-size scale. The details are gone. The figure gets blurred out because it cannot grab focus, right? But then here, if I attach this macro lens, and you can see how close I am to the subject, and look how much detail you can see. It's locking on. It's like the eyes, like Harry was saying, I can lock right onto this. I can lock onto that nose. All these little details are now extremely in focus for us if we're trying to do these close-up portrait shots of our figures. Now, hopefully that doesn't sound too confusing, because when we're talking about our focal length, or, aka our field of view, that's still going to be applied with the macro lens as well. But I would say that's why you don't need a wide macro lens. Like, for me personally, I use a 90mm macro lens.
I agree. That's a great point. Yeah, if you're trying to do like a wide angle, with a lot of things happening in the background, you really don't need, to focus on like tiny little details. So yeah, it doesn't really make any sense to get a macro wide lens. I would go for, a tighter lens for macros.
So as you guys can see here, this is my camera. I use a Sony a7 IV, but this is a 90mm macro lens. So I'm trying to show you guys how long this is, right? The longer this is, the higher the number of my millimeter essentially is. Like, if you see those giant, like, sniper looking scopes, lenses, those are like 300, 400, 800. So, and that's super narrow. We're not going for long shots. So with a 90mm macro lens, like we said earlier, and I can go ahead and bring up the chart again to show you, is that 90 is going to give you a tighter field of view, not wider. And this is essential for me for the style of photography I like to do. I want to get close up. I want to get those mid, chest, upper torso shot, or just full head shot. So I'm going to use a 90 for that. I know you can still do a 50, right? 50 works. I don't remember which one you use, Harry, but I think 50 works, 60 works.
Yeah, for my macro, it's actually from 50 all the way to 250. So I have a pretty nice range on that. But for my regular wide lens, that's not a macro. It's just a 25mm.
So for example, in this shot here, you've got the prototype Boba Fett here with Stormtrooper and Scout Trooper. This is not a macro lens. I'm shooting at a regular 50mm lens right here. So it's a little bit wider. So as you can see most of the subjects minus their feet, but that was by design here. The macro's not really necessary here because I'm not trying to highlight a ton of details. I'm more or less trying to show you a scene, right? And none of these guys have head sculpts, and I kind of wanted a little bit of a wider shot. Now the same situation applies here. This is the Obi-Wan Darth Vader, but I'm using him kind of like the scene from Rogue One. Like he's coming through the hallway right now. Again, you can see he's a little blurred. That's also kind of by design how I'm trying to do this shot. Again, this is not a macro. And then again, here you've got Batman. This is the Hot Toys Batman on the _Cycle. No macro, as you guys can probably tell by now. Why? Because I wanted to capture this wider scene. You can clearly see him riding the _Cycle. Now in this photo here, we've got Doctor Strange, right? The Multiverse of Madness one. And this is a macro lens. So you can see how close up I am and how I'm able to focus, how that lens is able to focus right on this figure. Because again, we're 6 scale, right? Now this is a little bit different. I've done different lighting and things of that nature, but you can see clearly who this individual is. The subject is clear, it's sharp, minus, I've got colors going on, I've got, whole composition going here, but you can see exactly who he is. I'm zoomed in. I want to show the details of the head sculpt. You can even see here with the highlights on the forehead, you can see all the pores in the skin. That's not going to happen with a regular lens. And same here with the Dead Strange. This is also a macro shot. I really want to capture everything, that all the details in Dead Strange's face, for example. And he's got a lot going on. This figure's amazing. I mean, all the arms, the scars, this figure's crazy looking. So I want to be able to show you, like, look at all this crazy detail on this guy. So again, this is where a macro lens is going to come in handy.
Yeah, and the same for me here. I also have a few examples. When you look at this Boba Fett shot right here, I wanted the visor to be completely in focus. I wanted to see all the little scratches on the helmet. So yeah, for that shot, the macro lens is the way to go. And the same thing with this other Boba Fett shot right here of him sitting in his cockpit. And as you can see, I really wanted to highlight all the little highlights on his visor, all the scratches on the helmet. Same thing with this Vader shot right here. I really wanted to catch that little highlight in his eyes, little reflection of the lightsaber. Instead of a shot like this right here, if he's standing, inside of this environment that's really, really big, you don't really need a macro lens for that. So I just went with my regular 25mm right here, just to capture the entire scene.
So again, I mean, that's really what sums up how you're gonna, if you're gonna do a macro lens, what the differences are from there. And hopefully when we talked about our focal length, you understand that the higher the number, the wider the shot, the lower the number, the wider the shot. So when we talk about stuff like that, that's kind of hand in hand. That's our focal length, right? But then what happens sometimes with our focal length, when we talked about our exposure triangle, depending on your style, is your depth of field, right? And your depth of field can be dictated pretty much by your aperture, right? How shallow that is, or how wide that is as well, right? And then what causes that as well, though, is also, as Harry mentioned before, is the distance that your camera is from your subject. And for demonstration, the photo here is this dog, right, as you guys can see. But in all 3 instances, at 2.8, at 11, and at 22, the dog still remains in the same exact spot, which is approximately 11 or 12 feet away. Now we're not measuring necessarily in feet, but for the purpose of this graph, you can see that the subject, the dog here, is not moving. It's in the same exact spot, right? So that's what you can see the aperture. The mountain represent here at 2.8 is so blurred out, but at 22 it's super in focus. So when you go into distance, right now you can see that the subject is in different distances. One is like 3 feet in front of the camera, one's 10 feet in front of the camera, one's 18 feet, from the camera. And the aperture is all the same. They're all at f8. So there is a difference, right? This kind of goes hand in hand sort of with the exposure triangle when you're trying to get that good composition going. This is also kind of relevant if, let's say, you want to have an f8. Well, now you can move that camera away, right? Do you see what I'm saying? It's different, but the aperture settings for your distance in this diagram is all the same. So there's different ways that you can kind of play around. Like maybe you don't have a lot of room, right? You're sitting at your desk, you don't have a lot of space, you're in a closed, kind of a cramped environment. Well, then you can't change the distance, right? You're not going to be able to move away from your monitor. Maybe you have to be really close to take the shot. So how do you get that blur, right? Well, that's where you'll go ahead and look at the aperture settings and change that, because your subject is static, your environment is crammed. then you can go ahead and use aperture to kind of create that depth of field rather than distance.
And another thing to keep in mind as well is when you look at the aperture diagram here, with a wider aperture, the focus range is actually a lot smaller, as represented by the the bright blue area here. Even the dog is not completely in focus. Only half of the dog is in focus because the focus range is so small. And the same thing with the distance. The further the subject is from your camera, the wider the focus range will be. Again, represented by the bright blue area here on the chart.
And again, guys, feel free anytime to leave a comment, message us, join our Discord, join the Facebook group, ask questions. I know this can sound daunting. I know it does. It's okay. But, go ahead and rewind, pause, take screenshots, whatever you need to kind of understand. Because it's like anything, I think, in life, bro. Like, the more you do it, the easier it's going to get.
Yeah, we all started in the same spot. All of these used to be just complete mumbo jumbo to me as well. And a lot of it still is. But obviously, the more you look into it, the more you do it, the more you practice, you'll just start to, to understand it without even having, to go through all these charts.
So that's going to wrap for us, guys, on our episode 4 here. Our next episode coming up, we are going to be talking about lighting. So that should be a fun one. We're going to show some, actual in-shot practical, like how we're going to set up lights. We're going to, if you guys want to work along, if you have some lights already and you kind of want to play along with us, or just, just test some things out, we're going to try to show you how 1, 2, 3 point lighting is going to work. And everything that you've learned so far in this series is going to be able to be applied here. So kind of this is where the fun begins, right? I think lighting is the most fun.
Yep, this is where the fun begins. Lighting, it's my favorite part of the entire process. So the next episode should be a lot more exciting and a lot more fun. I get it, it's super daunting learning all these, technical aspects of cameras and, and photography, but it's so necessary that we just have to, put up with it. I get it. It's not fun for me either, but in the end, it's gonna be all worth it.
Couldn't have said it better, my friend. So guys, thank you again for tuning in. Be sure to hit that like, subscribe if you're new to the channel, and stay tuned for episode 5, my friends. You guys have a great rest of your day, and we will see you guys in our next episode.